Hello, welcome to the first edition of the Sophie Scholl Society. And right away, you're thinking, who is Sophie Scholl? Well, to tell you about who Sophie Scholl is, I'm going to have you listen to Dr. Russ Porter saying who she is.
Sophie Scholl, a white rose. The daughter of a mayor in 1930s Germany, Sophie Scholl was caught up in the swirl of politics at an early age. And with the rise of the Nazi Party, the idealistic teenager and her older brother Hans quickly joined the Hitler Youth. They, like so many, bought the lie that Hitler would bring hope and prosperity back to Germany. But between her father's early anti-Nazi stance and her own careful observations, Sophie soon realized that Nazism was utterly incompatible with her Christianity. The letters Sophie received from her boyfriend, who had been conscripted into the army, which told of the atrocities the Nazis were committing, further convinced her that she needed to act, and the truth needed to be told. Simply leaving the Hitler Youth was not enough for Sophie, but open dissent in Nazi Germany was tantamount to signing your own death certificate. So with her brother and 4 other friends, she formed the White Rose, an underground nonviolent resistance movement dedicated to educating German youths about the evils of Nazism. The White Rose studied theology, philosophy, and politics together, and initially Hans wanted that to be the extent of Sophie's involvement, but she insisted on being fully engaged in the activism, convincing the men that as a female, she was far less likely to be stopped by the SS. The group purchased a typewriter and a duplicating machine, and by 1942 had begun disseminating their leaflets around the campus of the University of Munich, where Hans was a medical student and Sophie an undergrad. They also initiated an anti-Nazi and anti-Hitler graffiti campaign. As their mission grew, Sophie would buy the paper and stamps at several locations so as not to raise suspicion, and thousands of leaflets were mailed from different posts. However, in February of 1943, a utility man saw Sophie distributing the group's literature on campus. She was arrested by the Gestapo, tortured, and sentenced to death for high treason. As she was led to the guillotine, Sophie uttered her last words. "How can we expect righteousness to prevail when there is hardly anyone willing to give himself up individually to a righteous cause? Such a fine sunny day, and I have to go. But what does my death matter if through us thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action?" She was 21 years old. Sophie Scholl is a hero you should know. And I'm Dr. Ross Porter.
He said, a hero you ought to know. You know who Dietrich Bonhoeffer was, that martyr who gave his life as a theologian for the cause of Christ and even for his country, Germany. He laid it all on the line when he could have left Germany for good, but his heart placed him back in his own country, and he gave his life. You may even know Martin Niemöller. Martin Niemöller, a pastor there in Germany, who was arrested by the Nazis because he was faithful to the cause of Christ. Sophie Scholl, you heard about her. I have in my hand a white notebook, the substance of the White Rose. The White Rose were pamphlets circulated throughout Germany. The White Rose were leaflets that were given to the German people that were outspoken against the Nazis. The White Rose caused Sophie Scholl, her brother, Christopher Probst, and others to be beheaded. When you examine the life of Sophie Scholl, you will see a person that was devoted to Christ And in her devotion to Christ, she studied theology and philosophy and used that to perpetuate political activism in that nation. I want to read to you just a segment of what Sophie Scholl, her brother Hans, wrote in the first pamphlet. If people are already so corrupted and spiritually crushed that they do not raise a hand, if they surrender man's highest principle, his free will, if they abandon the will to take decisive action, if they are so devoid of all individuality, having already gone so far along the road toward turning into a spiritless and cowardly mass, then yes, they deserve their downfall. Therefore, every individual conscious of his responsibility as a member of Christian and Western civilization must defend himself against the scourges of mankind, against fascism and any similar system of totalitarianism. Offer passive resistance, wherever you may be. Forestall the spread of this atheistic war machine before it is too late. Man is free, to be sure, but without the true God, he is defenseless against the principle of evil. He is like a rudderless ship at the mercy of the storm, an infant without his mother, a cloud dissolving into thin air. Here, Sophie quotes a person by the name of Novalis who says, "Only religion can reawaken Europe, establish the rights of the people, and install Christianity in its new splendor visibly on earth, in its office as a guarantee of peace." This was from a 21-year-old who immersed herself in the Bible, in theology, in philosophy, and with her brother circulated words that were totally against the law in Germany. Germany suppressed free speech at that time. Sophie and her brother went to the University of Munich, and there, in one of these pamphlets, distributed them throughout one of the buildings. They placed them on the ledge on the second or third floor. The bell rang. They weren't all distributed yet. Sophie, in one move, pushed all those handouts, and they went fluttering down to the first floor. And all the students saw this. And there was a janitor who noticed that it was Sophie who did it. And there, she and her brother were arrested. It wasn't long before they were taken to the People's Court. And there, at the People's Court, they were condemned to death. And as Hans was about to go under the guillotine, the last words he said were, "Freedom!" And the guillotine chopped his head off. I want to take this time in the Sophie Scholl Society to explore theology, philosophy, in order that we be politically active in a culture that is against God, His ways, His truth. We look at the life of Sophie Scholl, and these are the things that she said. Somebody, after all, had to make a start. What we wrote and said is also believed by many others. They just don't dare express themselves as we did. Maybe there was a silent majority out there in Germany, but they just didn't dare to express themselves. Sophie and Hans did. It cost them everything. She said, I've been thinking of a story from the Old Testament. Moses stood all day and all night with outstretched arms, praying to God for victory. And whenever he let his arms down, the enemy prevailed over the children of Israel. Are there still people today who never weary of directing all their thinking and all their energy single-heartedly to one cause? She did exactly that. And I encourage you, as you tune in, to be tuned in ways that will direct you to a positive, good cause. Sophie said, I shall cling to the rope God has thrown me in Jesus Christ, even if my numb hands can no longer feel it. Are you willing to hold on that long? We will be exploring the lives of Hans and Sophie Scholl, as well as digging more deeply into this aspect of how our theology, shaped by the Bible, which is affirmed by good philosophy, leads us in ways to proper, good political activism in a culture that's empty of the truth of God.